Aloha and welcome to Coffee Without Milk, a podcast presented by Maui Institute for Modern Music and Ebb and Flow Arts. More information about upcoming concerts, events, and educational opportunities can be found at www.ebbandflowarts.org. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night. Welcome to Coffee Without Milk, the Ebb and Flow Arts podcast. I'm Peter Swansea, and to welcome our guest today, I'd like to introduce two of our very dear friends from our Ebb and Flow Arts education program. We have Loli and the professor to explain a little things today.
Hi, hello everyone. Welcome back. Doctor, are you down there? Yes, Loli, hello. How are you, Loli? Good. Thank you for your covering, face covering. We appreciate it. You know, we should stay protected. Well, Loli, we have a wonderful guest today, Sarah Cahill, I know. But before we do, could we explain the title of our podcast? It comes with a joke. Oh, not again, Doctor. Well, you know, some people haven't heard the joke, Loli, so can we just enact the joke, Loli? All right. Well, so I'll be the customer and you be the waiter, okay? We go into a restaurant and we say, I come in and I say, waiter, yes, I would like to have some coffee without cream. Oh, I'm sorry, sir. We don't have cream. Would you like coffee without milk? That's funny. But really, Loli, the opposite of coffee without cream is coffee without dairy creamer, powdered dairy creamer. That is the silliest thing. All right, so coffee without dairy creamer? Yes, Loli. Okay, then. Where are you going, waiter? Here's some dairy creamer. Ah! Oh! That was very bad of you, Loli. Well, anyway, it's a joke, indeed. Why don't we get on with our broadcast, Loli? Okay, thank you. Peter, could you take it away?
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, Professor and Loli. Today we welcome a very special guest, a person we've had the esteemed privilege to hear perform in Hawaii and whose talents we share in our Ebb and Flow Arts recorded releases as well. She is a world-renowned and universally acclaimed champion of piano performance. Her resume, of course, reads like a who's who of modern composers, and now she is helping to lead the revolution in discovery and celebration of women in music. We are so happy to welcome to our show Miss Sarah Cahill. Thank you, Sarah, for being here.
So much. Thank you. I'm so grateful to be here, and I admire your work so much with Ebb and Flow Arts and just all you're doing with education and your audiences. I mean, the range of your audiences and the support you have, the system you have in place. It's just, I think, a model for music organizations all over.
And against all odds, it's happening right here in Hawaii too.
Yeah, and it's great to do this when we're all sheltering in place. But Robert, does coffee, I have to ask you, what does this metaphor of coffee without milk, what does it mean to you?
Okay. That was not explained by the puppets this time.
More rehearsal might be necessary.
You can see that I've been watching too many Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis broadcasts. Have you ever watched those old TV shows? Oh, man.
The TV shows?
Yeah.
The movies?
From the 50s. Around that time, but they're on, they're on the internet. Yeah. Anyway, the coffee without milk is the idea that even though we may not need to or want to access a certain option, going out somewhere and doing something we may not need to, but just to know that we have that option is something of a relief. And so we're living now at a time when we have to cope with the fact that really those options are no longer terribly available to us. Yeah. So that's the coffee without milk. Does that make any sense? Maybe the more, but it's a joke.
Now it's been 4 months, since we've begun this global lockdown. 4 months, and it's almost the joke is nearing meaninglessness, because it's only it really is funniest when you think, yes, it will end soon, and yes, we can resume concerts and we can resume our activities, but in the face that we may not be able to, just indefinitely and continuing on now, unbelievably, the joke is more, it's like a bitter irony now. Like we may never have coffee with cream.
I think that's the hardest thing, is that when to start and say, okay, you have to do this for 30 days, or you have to do this for even 2 months. And we all think, yes, we can do this for a limited amount of time. And then the growing realization of what it all means. And so it's so important to find these forums for communication and contact and togetherness. And, here we are together in some way, listening to music together, and it's all we have. But another thing I admire about you, Robert, is that, people are so into how is my Zoom environment and what's going on in the background, and do I have my right books? Like, we're going to be looking at my book. Just this creative expression of your work. Well,
explosion
and things you're working on, and where everything is, I'm sure.
Well, it's sort of now contemplating whether live concerts will ever happen. It's are we going to have a century old return? Let's say, the notion of audience is not that old. It didn't start till the 1700s or 1800s that concerts were given, and there was a separation of the performers from the listeners, and even the composer and the performer, and all of those separations were happening, and we've been living in that world for a couple of centuries at least. But it seems like that there may have to be some sort of paradigm shift where we listen to each other over Zoom or through the internet. We don't have that separation anymore. It's all fused through the internet, and after that, we're kind of left to our own devices. And you've been now, Sarah, issuing through your YouTube and other channels, performance, your live performances, which are great, and we'll be playing back a lot of them today in this podcast. But it's a different world for music, performing arts. It's just becoming quite different. And, like you say, we hope that it returns, as Peter was saying, but as well. But because, we don't have to get into politics, but look, as it was Andrew Yang who pointed out this some time ago, that because there's no way to test, even now, there's not a comprehensive testing going on. We have no idea when the end will be. If we had testing that could let us see the pervasiveness of the spread wherever, at least we would have some sort of handle on it, and then could get a sense of when this will all end. But the surprising thing, and this will bring this up later, but you have this new project that's now being issued over your YouTubes as well. The Future is Female. It's a project, a ritual installation, and communal feminist immersive listening experience featuring more than 60 compositions by women around the globe. And again, we'll be listening to a number of those, but the Future is Female. If you look at what countries have done the best, have even so-called eliminated, which is to me still not quite understandable. What does it mean to eliminate this virus? But the countries that have done this are led by females. And in the United States, often, for example, look at Oregon, which just your northern neighbor, Sarah, that is having a spike, but not nearly the proportions of California and Washington State. Yeah. She's managed very well, and she's in a new battle, as we've seen recently, which could be, quite serious. But she seems to stand remarkably tall and courageous with it. So we look at for the female leadership. It was as she said, this has to do with the protests, but the governor, Kate Brown, said, and everybody has probably seen this with this young man who's shot by federal police holding up a boombox. And she said something like, he nearly died, and then, explaining what more, but for her, one person wounded who nearly died was the absolute red line. It's the point at which she unleashes total resistance to what's going on. It doesn't necessarily happen with the male in general, that they're not, in other words, a sensitivity that the female, it's too general to say this, but it generalized maybe, but there's a sense that the female leaders are much more in touch with the humanity of their constituents. Yeah. Often. But
well, sure. So, you look at New Zealand and what they've accomplished, and
New Zealand, Taiwan, Germany,
absolutely.
So it's
so
but
Americans are now banned. People from the United States are
imagine
travel to Europe.
Well, it's a danger to the world, and Cuomo said, which that state has done remarkably well, though. New York State.
They didn't shut down soon enough, but yes.
Yeah, but they, as he explains, they weren't told that the virus went to Europe from China, and from Europe it went to New York. But the federal government never told them about that. And so New York started with a huge spike, much higher than the country as a whole, much higher than any other part of the world. So they were caught with a huge disadvantage. And you're right, they made mistakes, but somehow they managed. But anyway, but regarding the Future is Female, what is what is the concept or thought behind that?
Yeah, so the idea about it being a sort of installation or ritual installation came from this is a project with about 60 different, well, let's see, more than 60 composers from all over the world, and 1608 onward. So starting with Elizabeth Jacques de la Guerre, and that's kind of the first keyboard music by women. So I put this project together on several levels, performance, of course, and education and advocacy, because I felt there was a real need, and how we so often hear these names like Clara Schumann or Fanny Mendelssohn, and we don't really study the music and really get to know the music well. And as I said, the ritual installation thing was the idea of doing a sort of immersion in a museum. So for instance, the first time I did it that way was at the North Dakota. We all hear of all male composers. So I thought, imagine if all these, the great pianists who are living now, like Murray Praya or Emanuel Ax or Marta Argerich or, any of them, if when they toured, if they had one work by a woman, one work by a person of color, imagine how that would change the landscape of piano performance. And if younger generations of pianists heard that and said, that's a really great piece by Sofia Gubaidulina, I'm going to think about programming that. Like, it would change the world. And this is what I want to do. So I travel to colleges, universities, and I talk with students and sort of ask them to challenge the classical canon. And they're playing works by, they're the great, Bach, Beethoven, Mozart. And then there's the second tier and the third tier and the fourth tier. And you get down to, whoever third and fourth rate composer, and they're getting solo music and chamber music by these composers who, you and I know aren't that great, but they're all white men. They all are. And imagine if, nothing against Carl Vine and Lower Lieberson, but those are the competition pieces that young pianists go to these competitions. They need a 20th century work. And so they play these pieces by Carl Vine and Lowell Lieberman, Lieberman. And which are fine, but there are so many, like the Gabriela Ortiz etude we're going to hear today, like, you want to just give it a chance, but to a lot of young students, that in itself is somehow risk-taking, taking too many risks to play a piece by a woman. And the question is why? And you, Robert, it seems like you always you're always promoting works by Dina Costin or, any number of you're so open. Vivian Fine, what I love about your series is that it's not one camp or another. So often we get stuck in these camps, stylistic camps, or, this person, but not this person. And you are so open, and you do include works by women, and your early work with George Walker. And that, to hear you play music by George Walker, and when you came to Berkeley and I heard you play George Walker, and I thought, that is real, that you play it with conviction and with passion and commitment. And it's like, that's what this music needs. It's like someone to say, this is so important. This is worth your time. I'm not just playing this because he's an African American man. I'm playing this because it's like, this is great music and I really believe in it. And this is what I'm putting forward. So I feel that about music by this is what I want to do in this project.
Yeah, well, it's very admirable. I'm reminded of the brief interview with George Walker's late wife, ex-wife, Helen Hill Walker, who, with her son Gregory, produced this incredible album of all African American women composers.
Ah.
It's amazing. And
yeah, and it's out of print, but we're trying to figure it out. So Gregory's got some copies of it, and the release is titled Kaleidoscope.
Yeah.
And it's got it's Gregory performing on violin, his mother's performing on piano. Isn't that it, Robert? So it's just piano violin duos, and you know, composers who probably had never been recorded up until that release. And it was a similar mission to your mission of discovery and celebration, to bring an awareness and to publish this work that I don't know. I mean, they had to dig it up. It was really, really difficult to find, from what I understand, and they had to search long and far to find it.
Yeah. And
how could something so valuable become out of print, I wonder?
Yeah.
I wonder too, especially right now, because it seems like we're right on the edge of this huge explosion of all of this other music, you know, trying to bring it out into the open and bring it to people's ears. And especially right now when everybody wants something to listen to, you know, when we're stuck at home or wherever we're stuck.
Exactly. Exactly.
So in that interview, she describes how when she was studying and she became curious about women composers, not African, just generally women composers. And she asked her professor, what about works by women composers? And her professor, this is in college somewhere, said, well, there are none. So it's that too. It's just this, the male ego or something refuses to even admit to these works existing at all.
Yeah.
Let alone being performed with commitment and you know, in concert programs regularly. But
you think of Florence Price writing to, I think it was it Serge Koussevitzky or was it another composer, where she says, just please listen before you have the preconceptions of, you know, this music is by a woman, so it lacks structure and integrity, and it's just pretty melodies, and it's, I mean, she goes through the stereotypes about music by women composers, and she says, please do me a favor, and before you throw it out because of those things, because it's by a woman, just listen to it. And, you know, you think about that with so much music that we have preconceptions about. Just listen. And again, I just have to throw it back to you, Robert, and say how much I admire that you're the kind of person who listens to the music before you make judgments about it, which is so great. And and Florence Price also writing to Koussevitzky and saying, I have two strikes against me. I'm a woman and I'm an African American. And, you know, the fact that these composers have to sort of make these pleas for their work and advocate for their works, and such strong women, Florence Price and Margaret Bonds, I mean, that they're the determination and the strength to just persevere in the face of so much so much racism and bigotry. Yeah.
Well, we are thankful to you, Sarah, for this work and for introducing me to the work of, for example, Johanna Bayer. And also much more to the work of Ruth Crawford with your wonderful CD album. You've produced 20 CDs, something
like that.
Yeah, it's amazing. And you've commissioned 60, at least something or more. But why don't we listen? You mentioned. Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Yes, and I want to talk to you.
We're deeply honored.
I mean, sorry.
But shall we start listening? Peter, do you have, this was a kind of last minute thought that we include the chaconne of Sofia Gubaidulina. Do you have that one?
Yeah, I'd love to listen to that. We've got that queued up too.
Why don't we start with that one? You had mentioned it, Sarah, in your previous comments just now. Did you want to say something about the work? It's a.
This is an early piece that she has sort of disavowed, actually, that she numbers her Opus 1 several years after this piece. So this doesn't even merit a place in her catalog because she thinks of it as almost not juvenilia, but a young work that is not, I guess, representative of what how she sees her style. But it's a chaconne in the sense that it's an homage to Bach. As you know, Bach shows up in her other pieces. And Robert, you said you went to her hometown?
Yeah, we participated in the Europe-Asia Festival for Modern Music twice. And the second time, several works by her were performed amazingly, something I will never forget, by musicians to whom these works had been dedicated by Sophia. There was a cellist named Vladimir Tonka and a bandoneon player whose name now escapes me, but they played works either solo cello, a chamber concerto for the two of them, and just absolutely astounding and breathtaking. And Kazan, Russia is where Tatarstan is, my understanding, is where she was brought up and taught, and she later moved to Germany. But she was not at the festival, but they made a deep impression on me. And then later here, a contrabass player and I performed a work of hers a few times in Hawaii called Pantomime.
There's a piece for bass and piano?
Yeah, there are two actually.
Huh.
This one called Pantomime. And, but isn't the chaconne still, you might say, often performed or a standard of hers, or is it it's not considered central to her work at all? How is that?
I get the impression she doesn't think it's central.
She doesn't.
But it has been performed a number of times. So there are several recordings on YouTube of young Russian pianists just playing it incredibly fast. I mean, they do a dazzling job, but I don't know. Anyway,
well,
I think there are several different interpretations possible. This is also a piece that you can play for the next 20 years and get deeper into it, and so yeah.
I think that's what I appreciate about your review of it, is because instead of turning it into a showpiece, it's kind of trying to seek the inner depth harmonically, and it's more careful, I think, to try to discover and expose the intricacies of it.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, actually, should we go ahead and have a listen, Robert,
yes,
so everybody knows what we're talking about here?
It's about 10 minutes.
Yeah.
All right, and how do you pronounce her name again? I just want to make sure I get it right.
Gubai Dulina.
Gubai Dulina, thank you.
Gubai Dulina.
Bravo.
Thank you.
Powerful.
So what I love about the Gubai Dulina, what Sophia does is she encapsulates so many styles, from fugue, you know, all the colors, all the intensities. It's almost like here's how to listen to music in the last 250 years in some way or another. She really captures a lot of harmonic depth and a lot of kind of tonal complexity too. It's a really interesting work, and it has so many phases and shifts in terms of dynamics too. And I feel like you're able to find a place where they can all exist and all stand out on their own as well. Really a beautiful recording.
So much. What an insightful thing to say about the different styles and and that the Shakan theme brings it all together. That there's this theme going throughout, and as you say, it goes through so many different sort of adventures along the way. But
and you lead us as a performer, you lead us through where we kind of know where we are in the piece, thanks to your interpretation.
It's such a great piece. And it is, as I say, it's the kind of piece you want to work on for, you know, the rest of your life. But I was doing this I did a Shakan program with like the great Carl Nielsen Shakan and Stefan Volpe, Dance of the Form of a Shakan, which the pianist Richard Good gave to me, the score, and Handel Shakan, and just what a Shakan has meant through the years. Cecile Chaminade and Elizabeth Jacquet de la Guerre and many others. So it's a fascinating form. Have you written a Shakan, Robert?
Something akin to one in a piece was piano quartet that had something akin to it, a Shakan.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
But a part of that piece of mine. But anyway, there's so many pieces that we would like to have our audience hear from your work. For example, the Cowell Rhythmicana.
Rhythmicana, yeah.
That would be good. That's a piece that you played here, actually, in Hawaii, in Hilo.
Yes.
At the Cahill Theater.
Do you find this piece to be really amazing for 1938? I mean, that it's so I don't know, the polyrhythms and polymeters. Do you find it sort of revolutionary for that time?
Yeah, absolutely. There's some aspects that the beginning suggests more of a romantic, maybe passionate type approach that we can identify with. But if one looks at the score, the rhythms are intricate to the point that he invent a machine to enable some of his work in this area?
He invented a rhythmicon with Leon Theremin. They invented the rhythmicon together that was capable of several complex meters at once. This piece is sort of emulating that in the sense that in the beginning, I mean, what you hear sounds romantic, but on the page, it's groups of clusters of fives, so little sort of gruppettos of fives against a big group of, 7 or 6 or sort of large groups against small groups. So it takes a lot of counting. And and then the second movement has groups of 13 in the left hand against groups of 6 and 7 and 8 and 9. And it keeps shifting every measure. It shifts to something else. So 13 against 6 and then 17 against 7 and so on. And it keeps shifting. So it's really, it's hard, and
it sounds really difficult.
Yeah.
13 against 7.
Yeah. And he wrote this when he was in San Quentin, where he was for 4 years, from 1936 to 1940. And so that's where he wrote this piece. And it was, I decided at one point that it was important to take this music back into San Quentin and play it there for the inmates. And so I did this project of all music that he had written in San Quentin during those years. And just the fact that he had such, again, strength and determination. And I mean, as you say, we're going through something right now with the pandemic, but think about, trying to write music in San Quentin when you have like a piano for a couple hours once a week and so on. And it's kind of incredible.
Yes.
But yeah, I should get the score while we're listening to it. And
show us a bit of it. Yeah. Show us a bit of it. But when you performed it in Hilo, not Hilo, Camuela, at the Cahill Theater, yeah. Afterwards, the lady sitting next to me whispered, "She must be very intelligent." So I said, "Yes, she is." And that's you have such an amazing brain that, and also this amazing knowledge of the composers you're championing. It's not just a superficial, let's pick up the score. It's although you didn't get to know Cowell directly, but there are a number of composers that you've performed whom you like Leo Ornstein, who you went and met with him, and you told us that story on Maui in your first concert here. Of the two you've been here, it's twice that you've been here, and but it's this deep knowledge of the composers whom you champion that informs your performances in a way. Is that something you could describe, how that deepens your interpretation?
Oh, well, thank you for saying that. I mean, I think I'm just fascinated by, well, Cowell in particular. I mean, his story is so touching, of growing up in poverty here in California, finally scraping together enough money to buy a piano, but not having money for lessons. And so he invented his own way of playing. And I'm convinced that if he had traditional lessons in, doing this like we all do, that he would never have done the forearm clusters, hand clusters, reaching inside the piano, plucking the strings, strumming the strings. He would never have done that if he had had formal lessons. And I think it's an important lesson to all of us, sort of leaning towards autodidacticism, that it's your imagination can take you to all kinds of different places. And he was a remarkable person. But I think I'm just really, I love researching composers and understanding how to interpret their music according to who they were as pianists. So I think what I'm saying is that when I'm working on your Enneagram, I look at videotapes of you recording, and I talk to you about your intentions and think of you at the keyboard. And that really has a lot. I mean, for me, whether it's Gabriela Ortiz or Terry Riley or any number of composers who were also fine pianists themselves, or Frederick Rzewski, watching them. I mean, I know when I play Frederick Rzewski, for instance, that he's so considered in his sense of, there are many different kinds of staccatos, and his history with the European avant-garde, and that he premiered pieces by Boulez and Stockhausen, and which are very, very particular and sort of micromanaged in their sense of every dynamic and every articulation has to be just so. And so he's very, very specific about his markings, and some composers less so. And seeing how Terry Riley improvises at the piano leads me to then know something about how to approach his notated scores. And it's just, I think it's fascinating, and it requires sort of detective work and exploring and really going beyond what's on the page. And I know some colleagues who are just like, okay, I'm just going to play what's there. I'm not going to listen to any other recordings of anyone playing it. I'm not going to listen to the composer's recording. I'm just going to play it. And that's fine too, but I just prefer to sort of try and that's the way I do it, I guess.
You develop a relationship between who they are as an individual and how their music portrays them. And so they're imagining themselves through their music, through their stylistic choices and their notation choices. And you like to be informed by who they are and where that comes from, so that your performance will speak to the history of that work and the story of that individual, is kind of what it sounds like to me. And I think that imagination is probably one of the most important words, because you have to imagine and put yourself in their place, especially when you're talking about Terry Riley, because when he's performing and improvising, anything that he's written down must come from a place where that is happening too, I'd imagine. And with Cowell, letting himself discover his style based on what he wants and what he can imagine without any limitation, and then to perform it with that in mind, I think is probably the most honest way to perform his work.
Oh, well, that's great. You're saying so many interesting things. I wanted to break
the often the male ego is the type performer who, as you describe, will not consider, the inner workings and the life of the composer, and allow for, an interpretation that's well, much more in depth in a way, and these anyway. But
don't you think it's one other option? Like, you've probably had the experience of performers playing your work, not necessarily working with you, but then having a really deep interpretation of your music, very understanding, just based on what's on the page, without really talking to you or communicating or getting to know what you want. Is that sometimes true? I mean, I know that that's an approach that people sometimes take, that like, don't get in touch with the composer, just really develop your own, deepen your own sense of the piece alone. And is that, don't you think that's a viable alternative?
Yeah,
the performer can show the composer maybe more than they'd even realized in the work sometimes, without any bias, maybe.
That's a function too of the composer's ability to put in the score all that's needed for an accurate interpretation and rendition, heartfelt. Something about just thinking of some big name performers who, for example, we brought up Heifetz the other time, but who readily would transcribe works and change notes, and just for his purposes as a performer. But in any case, the Cowell Rhythmicana is roughly a 7-minute work, and why don't we listen to this remarkable and very much ahead of its time piece that is so intricate.
Yeah, that way at least we can have some sense of what we're all talking about here. All right, so this was written in 1938, Rhythmicana, Henry Cowell. And when did you recorded this in 2013, Sarah?
It looks that way.
It looks that way to me too. Great. Well, we're nearly ready to celebrate the 7th anniversary of this performance.
Ah.
All right, let's have a listen.
Okay. Yeah, Rhythmicana. So I have the score here. It's dedicated to Johanna Bayer. I don't know if you can see that.
Oh, that's really something. Wow.
To Johanna Bayer.
Yeah.
So you can see I was wrong. It has groups of 5 and 4 of these sorts of clusters. So and then above that, there's like, here's a group of 3 and then a big group of 3, and it keeps changing. And the second movement, I just have to very quickly show you, but the second movement is as I described, so it keeps changing. The groups keep changing all the time. So that's tricky. And then the main thing is you have to keep that melody. So the melody going in with your thumb. And so your thumb has to just keep the melody. And then the last movement, so this is very typical of Cowell, that it sounds sort of conventional, the last movement. But see, the left hand is playing 5/4, the right hand is playing 3/4, and so it sounds like da 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 da. It sounds 1 2 3 1 2 3, but it's not written that way.
Yeah.
And then he changes halfway through, so the right hand is in 5 and the left hand is in 3. So it's just, I mean, it's interesting because when he's young, when he's a teenager, when he's 14 or 15, he does things like that, but you think, well, maybe he doesn't quite understand, maybe because of his lack of formal training, he doesn't quite understand music notation, that you don't do like, you don't have different time signatures in each hand. You don't have one time signature, key signatures. Like he has different key signatures in each hand. And you think, no, you're not supposed to do that. But then he becomes an incredibly influential composer in the 20th and 21st century, one of our greatest composers. And then you see later on Stockhausen in his Klavierstücke do very similar things and do things with chord clusters and unusual key signatures and all kinds of things that Cowell did half a century before, but never gets credit for, and so it's all just a very interesting, his place in 20th century music, and very, very
well. Thankfully, you not only champion his music, but really you might say the West Coast school from Harrison and Riley and so on. You've championed it, but also champion. Maybe that's not a good term, champion, but just advocated and dedicated yourself to so many living composers and historic composers that are largely neglected because of the difficulties as we just witnessed. So it's tremendously admirable why you would do that. You could have had a career as a pianist of the classics and so on, but you chose to tackle this kind of a piece that most traditional pianists would take one look at and shelf, because it just, certainly we've all had the experience of handing a piece over to a pianist who is a more traditional pianist who says, look, we just don't do that kind of thing. It's the irrational groups and the fives against whatever. Although my late piano teacher, Robert Helps, as you know him, used to say the hardest to play is 3 against 4.
3 against 4 is really hard. And then it's right there
after that
in the Chopin Trois Nouvelles Etudes, it's 3 against 4. I mean, with Chopin, yeah. But
still, how do you would you say you were a child prodigy because you started playing concertos at 12 or something like that?
A self-admitted child prodigy. Certainly your biography, I think, indicates.
Was it that when you moved to Berkeley because your father became a professor of Chinese art at Berkeley, University of California, Berkeley, was it was it the influence of the creative environment in Berkeley that prompted you that way, or your studies at the San Francisco Conservatory, et cetera, with John Adams? And
yeah, it was all a bad experience at a piano competition. It was, so yes, I was trained here from a young age. At the age of 7, I met this amazing woman, Sharon Mann. Her name then was Sharon Polk, Bach specialist, beautiful. She looked like Jane Fonda in Clute, with the shag haircut and the shawls and the lace-up boots. And I mean, she was funny and beautiful and treated me like an adult. And from a young age, she taught me the dances in the Bach partitas and English suites and French suites and well-tempered clavier. And it was all Bach. And she said, here's the concerto you're going to, now you're going to play the Bach D minor concerto. And to understand this, go back and listen to the Qui Tollis movement of the Mass in B minor. And at the same time, my father was, he had this extraordinary collection of 78. So I learned music from 78s from, like, we're going to hear Mahler. And so let's listen to Bruno Walter conducting Mahler on these 78s. And we would go to the living room and just sit, and the CDs, the 78s would drop one by one, and it would like clunk. And we would just listen and not do anything else. So the pianists I grew up with were Schnabel and Serkin and all the great old school, Walter Gieseking and Myra Hess. But so eventually, I mean, I was thinking of just classical music, but then I went to the Clara Haskell competition in Vevey, Switzerland. And I was eliminated in the preliminary round. And I had just met my husband, John, and so we were traveling together. And I was so confused because I worked for maybe a year and a half practicing this Bach Prelude and Fugue and Scarlatti Sonata and Brahms Intermezzo that was the preliminary round. And it was one of these horrible, you go in and the room's dark and the judges are like a room, like they're way far away and they look really severe. And one young, very confident guy actually threw up on the way, walking up the stairs on the way to the stage because he was so nervous. And it was really hard. And then to sort of question everything and like, what do I have to say about, a Liszt etude? And I mean, it never felt it never felt like this is my mission. And as soon as I played music as soon as I started working with composers, I thought, now I have a real mission in life. I mean, I have a purpose that I didn't have before. And also playing early 20th century music, like getting Mark Blitzstein's scores that had never been played before were in manuscript and like figuring them out. It's that sense of now I have a purpose in life that I didn't have before. And if I were still playing, the Beethoven Tempest Sonata, I love that music and I love playing Schubert and love listening to it. And if you give me a chance to play the Trout Quintet, I'll jump at it immediately. But in terms of purpose in life, I think this is more it. Yeah.
Well, and beyond all of this, you also have a regular radio broadcast still. Is that still happening?
That's still happening. I was doing it from shelter in place. So sending in old interviews that I had done. And so it was sort of, for a while, it was just a sort of archived, like, here's a 2-hour interview with Kaya Saryaho, or here's a 2-hour interview with John Adams or something. But now it's back to doing it live. And
Revolutions per Minute.
Revolutions per Minute, yeah.
And KALW 91.7 FM.
Yeah, KALW.org.
Funny, we have 91.7 Mana'o Radio in Wailuku.
Oh, 91.7.
But
that's great.
Never the twain shall meet.
Yeah. And so this is a podcast, but it's also video.
Yes.
So you can still call it a podcast even when it has video?
Well,
we might use the term liberally. We like to, we think that it is a portal to access. It's nice to see the conversation when I'm at home and I'm doing work. I like to see the conversation. I feel like I'm more in the room with the guests that way. Sometimes if I'm engaged in other activities and I'm wandering around the house with headphones, but then I come back and I can see their expressions and I can see their example. And in the case of your performances, I can see your expressions, and even just the way that you move during a performance just gives me, I think, a bit of greater insight. So we make the video available as another dimension of the podcast.
That's great. That's great.
I like it. I seem to think so. I was curious about something. We were talking about your time in Berkeley and, going through the list of women that you're working with for your new project. I see a lot of familiar names through Mills College. And Mills has always been, to me, one of those incredible key kind of fulcra of 20th century, especially in the last, 30 or 40 years. What is your opinion of what is happening there now, and who's in charge, and what kind of great things are they working with in Mills? It seems like you probably have access.
That's a sad thing to bring up, because I was just talking with a friend who's at Mills who said that Mills probably won't survive this pandemic. And it's just wreaking such havoc on educational institutions. And that I hear, I mean, this isn't, I don't know if this is public knowledge, but I hear that they're trying to team up with UC Berkeley in doing something or saving. And I imagine those two music departments coming together, because they've always been like, here's UC Berkeley, here's Mills, and never the twain shall meet. But I hope they'll be in the spirit of open-mindedness that you, Robert, encapsulate. I hope that they will be able to work something out. Mills has always just been incredible. You think about the history with Darius Mio teaching generations of people, from Phil Lesh to Ellie Armour, and Luciano Berio was there, and Lou Harrison, and Terry Riley. Terry Riley started doing his first notated works in more than a decade at Mills when he met the Kronos Quartet there. And the Center for Contemporary Music, I think it's still called, with, incredible, the women in electronic music, Maggie Payne, who's been there for decades, and Letitia Sonami, and Pauline Oliveras, and Amy X. Newberg, and Pamela Zia. It's just incredible. Incredible who has been through Mills, both as students and teachers. And Roscoe Mitchell teaches there now. There's always been the Darius Mio professorship. My piano, my beat up 9-foot Baldwin that I got from the studio that Alvin Curran and Pauline Oliveras shared, which is, it's a wonderful piano, but I think when there were stories of Alvin Curran doing pieces for a 7-foot long tree branch that he put inside the piano, and there was also a pile of mouse droppings in the piano for a while. So it's a really amazing legacy there. What's your relationship with Mills?
I was accepted into their graduate program some years ago. Then we ended up having a child, and I remained in Hawaii during that time. But I visited the campus a number of times, and I developed just a real brief relationship with Maggie when I was there. And, when I was there, I had just graduated undergraduate with my music degree, and I was completely in awe of the history of the buildings, even the old wood and everything, and all the halls. And it was just incredible to be there, and it's never left my heart. And I just know that it is such a magnet for a lot of the incredible revolutionary work. And as I was going through the list of all the folks that you've worked with and commissioned from, I realized that so much of it has passed through Mills or been as a result of Mills.
Yeah. And it's also the kind of place, it's the idyllic campus where you go and you just go, like that. You know, it's like just and everybody, there's a frog pond there, and every composer, I think every young composer who goes through there who does electronic music uses the frog pond in some piece, you know, and it's
an homage to the frog pond.
right, yeah.
Yeah, well,
Thank you very much.
It's not easy being green. Yeah.
Well, I wish the best for Mills. I hope that through the incredible historical and community support, the college is able to continue to thrive. Yeah. And whether that means that they have to adapt to, you know, even broadening their expanse and their reach and their academic, you know, influence, I hope that they find a way. I have no doubt they will. I mean, they're so important. So.
Yeah.
You know, one thing that is missed in all of this too is, for me, the joy of production, you know, all that it takes to eventually get the concert to happen. It just has always been really exciting for me.
Really, isn't there a part of you that says, "Oh, I'm so glad I don't have to do that, raise money and all the print out tickets and everything."
Well, the raising the money, but no, just the things like, remember when Peter, didn't you set up a screen for Sarah the time she was at the Teavalite Church? And
sure,
you know, all of those pre-production or production mode aspects of putting on concerts is also gone for the moment.
I mean, I think what it is for me is I'm not scared of hard work. It was nice briefly to take a break from hard work, but I love the concept of a concert in the sense of how can we create the best experience possible? What positions, what acoustics, the audience, how are we going to prepare, and how are we going to market this, because we want to reach as many people as possible. And now that it's been 4 months, I have to say I really, really miss being a part of live music. It's really a sad thing, it just to not have it available. And everybody's trying new things. And some of it's working and some of it's not. But I do love that all artists and composers and performers are still exploring all the media available to them right now in as best a way as they can, figuring it out.
I'm thinking of music that works well on upright pianos because they're easier to move outside and do a concert somewhere outside. And so right now I'm really into this composer. She's an Ethiopian nun. She's 96 right now, Emahoi Segwe Miriam Gebru, and she writes really amazing notated music. And I want to combine it with Mamoru Fujieda's Patterns of Plants and some music to do outdoors. So I'm arranging a concert at the Lou Harrison's Straw Bale House in Joshua Tree in Southern California, and going there and putting a piano outdoors, and and thinking of ways to do a concert for socially distanced, and so of course you have to limit the audience to maybe 20 or something. But just to think
amplifying the piano,
maybe not necessarily amplifying, but just having people close enough that they can hear. And I think we do need live music and music in person and some way outdoors, because that's a way we can come together, is doing concerts outside. And so people don't want to do concerts inside because we all hear about the chorus in Washington State, and how it travels, how the virus travels. So I think outdoors is some possibility. And here there's a park right on the bay where I think we're going to move my grandmother's old spinet and just do a concert of music and maybe just leave have a ritual goodbye to the spinet or something. I mean,
wow.
There must be, I'm just trying, I think we do need to think in ways that we hadn't thought of before. And that's why we are seeing so many organizations go under, because it's just, they can't, especially big organizations that just can't think in any other way except like, we have to do this, we have to have the symphony on stage together. We can't social distance. We there has to be some solution, and we have to keep going. And
well,
it has to be some other way than online. So
you've done concerts in the redwoods.
Yeah.
Already.
Oh, in a forest or in a venue, or I mean, an outdoor venue, or just in the forest?
Outdoor.
Oh, okay.
Outdoor park. Yeah. Piano in the redwoods. Just to think of ways. I don't know.
Yeah.
Of course, a piano is hard to move around. But
it's one of the hardest things to move around.
Yeah.
Again, or do we have to rethink the whole paradigm, the composer, performer, listener paradigm? Do we have to just change in what that connection is, what the interaction is between the three elements, or fuse certain elements again as they had been centuries ago?
How do we change that?
Well, the notion that there's not a distinction between the performer and the listener. The listener becomes a performer within the context. There really isn't a line between the composer and the performer. That these things become more homogenized somehow. Just speculating, but it's hard to know. But it's born from this idea, or this horrible prospect that live concerts as we've known them are a thing of the past.
Or they're for a more select audience, whether that's through some kind of a lottery system or by invitation too. The outdoor venue sounds ideal. I mean, in Hawaii, we could make that happen nearly year round. So but we don't. I mean, we have an outdoor venue, but as far as I know, we're not booking anything there yet at the Maui Arts and Cultural Center.
There's talk of the cars, the drive-in sort of approach.
But then I heard about drive-ins where you drive in and then the stage is here and then it's amplified.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, we all love just the being in the room and the sound and, that relationship of the acoustic sound of the instrument. We all love that so much, and it's such a deep connection, which we don't get on the screen or in amplification necessarily.
The room does lend its own personality to a performance. Absolutely. Actually, we talked about that a bit with Duo Diorama. We invited them onto the show a couple of months back, and they had performed at a Frank Lloyd Wright church. And that was one of their comments, was that it was such a unique acoustic environment to perform in that it enhanced the performance in that way too. And I think that a performer is listening to the way the sound propagates, and they might even make decisions on the fly based on how they're hearing the sound in the room. And I think the audience experiences it too. It's more immersive, to be indoors. But also when you're talking about an idyllic situation, whether it's in the redwood forest or on the bay or different outdoor venues, that is a combination of a natural environment that could also, I think, create a different experience for an audience that could have its own incredible benefits as well.
Yeah.
It'd be very Cajun, hearing the sounds too.
Some music is more suited than others. There's a project in Golden Gate Park that this guy Dean Mermel and Mauro Fortissimo, they do together, and they move a dozen grand pianos into the botanical gardens of Golden Gate Park, and they have professionals come and play, but they also have anybody who visits the park can come up and play one of the pianos. And it's remarkable because you get students who don't even take off their backpacks, and they come up and they start playing Chopin etudes flawlessly, by heart with no, so, I mean, everybody has a relationship to the piano, whether past or present or future, and people gravitate to pianos. And so it didn't happen this year because they get so many people there, but I mean, it's just, also what I'm trying to say is that it's less suited to Rachmaninoff sonata, Rachmaninoff Etude Tableau or something than it is to perhaps Eric Satie, Gymnopédie or something. there's music that works better outdoors than others.
I can see that being true. It's
Gebrauchs-
immersive in an interactive way too. I'm sorry, Robert, what were you saying?
That's all right. Gebrauchs music, that is that the sort of thing we're talking about? Isn't Gebrauchs?
Gebrauchs is, for purposeful.
Yeah.
Gebrauchs for work.
So this is a piece by Johanna Bayer, the dedicatee of Rhythmicana, and a close associate of Cowell, obviously, whom you introduced, Bayer, whom you introduced to us. We ended up discovering a piece she calls Music of the Spheres.
Oh, the percussion piece?
Yeah, but originally electronic or involving electronics as well.
I think that the electronics, it was a reimagination. So that the electronic component came later as sort of a new realization of the work. I think originally it was percussion.
No, I think actually it was one of the earliest electronic music. You're right that it was. I got it mixed up with another piece, but electronic music. Very, very early pioneering piece.
Amazing piece. And we call our series in the planetarium Music of the Spheres. So it was a direct connection. We programmed it. It got an amazing rendition by the planetarium director. These digital effects on the dome, full dome effects that were really wonderful and powerful. But her dissonant counterpoint and other pieces that you've recorded are really extraordinary and groundbreaking for a female composer, but also in general, just remarkable work. And there's not much known about her. There's not much.
Yeah, there's not much known about her. There's, I think, only one photograph of her, which is a group photograph. So if you blow it up, it's very fuzzy. Like you can't even really see her features. But it's the only known photograph of her. Her music was really advocated by Larry Polanski, who published her work in his Frog Peak Music publishing, very small publishing house. And his partner, Amy Beale, wrote a biography of Johanna Bayer, but there isn't very much information, and I think she was very, very private. And I always think of her work sort of like Emily Dickinson's poetry, that it is this private world where you can barely get in. I mean, you're afforded a glimpse into a private world, but it's not sort of like, blah, here I am. It's just a little microcosm glimpse. So yeah, very private woman, I think.
It reminds me of the photographer Vivian Maier, right?
Vivian Maier, yes.
Boxes and boxes and boxes of incredible photographs that were never shared with anybody during her life, that were only discovered later.
Found at a garage sale or something, right?
It was something like that. I don't know. There was a documentary. I didn't see it, but it just reminds me of that story that sometimes the artist will create entirely in private just for their own necessity, but they don't have the urge to share it somehow. And it is only later, I think, that their work can be fully appreciated. And I wonder if maybe we're just on the edge of discovering much more about Johanna Bayer as well. I mean, a new renaissance of her work, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Gebrauchs music number one.
Yeah, and why don't we do it this way, if that's all right? These are all part of your project, The Future is Female. Johanna Bayer, Gabriela Ortiz, Preludio e Studio number 3.
Yeah, this is just the etude number 3.
The etude number 3. And then is it Martiniati?
Gebokle Martinetite.
Okay.
Yeah, she's Lithuanian.
Gebokle Martinetite. Okay.
Young Lithuanian composer.
Heights and Depths of Love.
Yeah, just the first movement.
The first movement. So shall we just go play 3 of them like that?
Sure. Sounds good.
So and it's a total of about 17 minutes or so, the 3 pieces total. Okay.
Great.
Is that good? Do you have those up?
I have them up, yeah. There'll be probably a short pause in between while I queue up the next one, and then we might mention kind of what it is as well. So the first one we're going to hear from the selection is Joanna Bayer, Gebrauchs Music #1. And I've got that ready to go. And anything that you wanted to mention again, Sarah, before we take a listen?
Sounds good.
Okay. And next we're going to listen to Gabriela Ortiz, Preludio e Studio #3. And I may need your help with the pronunciation again, Sarah. Zibukle Martinitai. I tried.
Good try. Jibuakle Martinetite. I'm not even pronouncing it right, but that's sort of slightly close.
We're doing our best. We're doing our
Lithuanian
Martinetite. And this
first movement of heights and depths of love.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bravo.
Yeah, thank you.
Can you speak a bit about the Gabriela and
Gabriela Ortiz?
Yeah.
Yeah, so she's incredible. She's a composer born in Mexico, has written for various forces. She wrote an opera, which I think, or a large symphonic work, which was going to be premiered by the LA Phil in the fall, I think, and now has been postponed indefinitely. So she's written 3 of these sets of preludes and etudes, and in this case, it was just the etude. And this was my husband John doing a camera, moving it around at my mother's house.
Good camera work, John.
Thank you. I know somehow he got way, way, way above the piano. I don't know.
It was very cool. Very dynamic.
Thank you. But yeah, I wrote to her and asked for some scores. And there's one that's influenced by Bartók and one that's influenced by Ligeti, or sort of inspired by, but this one is not. And it's just a really, really amazing piece.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Powerful
Very
played.
powerful. Oh, thank you. And I love the way she uses the full range of the
full range. Exactly. I was looking.
She starts at the lower keyboard and she goes up to the very, very top. Yeah.
Yeah, it's incredible contrast too.
And that's the kind of piece that should be played a lot by young pianists, by pianists in conservatories. It should be studied. It should be played. It should be taught, and yeah,
it's an exploration of musicianship as well. I would say for any student to be able to accomplish that work, I think would give them an incredible musicianship.
Yeah.
How many etudes did she write?
I think as far as I know, she has 3 of these sets of preludes and etudes.
Okay.
So this is number 3. Yeah.
And the other work, Heights and Depths of Love.
Yeah, Shibuakle Martinetite. So I was just interested in her as a composer and was looking at her website and ordered this piece. I just bought this piece and started playing it. And then she wrote to me and said, the pianist that she wrote it for had stopped playing the piano, maybe for an injury or some reason, had stopped, and so never premiered it. So I got to do the premiere, and it's that was from a performance at Bowling Green. So
was that the premiere at Bowling Green?
No, I played it at the Detroit Institute of Arts right before that.
Yeah, it's great to see you in all these different venues. Obviously, you've concertized all over.
I try.
And so now we have another, let's say, a group of 3: Dane Rudger, Leo Ornstein, and John Adams. Shall we go through those? So
3 women to 3 men.
Yes, it so happens.
Yeah,
but. Peter would be interested in the Rudger work called Stars from Pentagrams number 3, because Peter wrote a piece recently called Stars.
Oh, you did?
Well, the work, it was based on Korean poetry, and so it was performed in
that's right,
in Seoul. I want to say, was that 2017 or 18, or
something
maybe I don't know.
Yeah.
Time is meaningless. I've lost track, but
see, that's our only living concert outlet right now, Sarah, is in Seoul, Korea. We have an ongoing project there where we've commissioned work, and they have an annual concert. Their group Veritas Musicae. And apparently they still do public concerts because they handled the virus fairly well, with some spikes here and there, but they do have public concerts. So the irony of it all is that we can only get our public renditions out of the country right now. But Stars from Pentagrams number 3. So Dane Rudger was an astrologist as well as
yes, and there are many people who only know him as an astrologer rather than a composer, and they're surprised he wrote music. But he started out in Paris. Daniel Chenevier was his name, and he wrote some pieces there. I play his Opus 1, which is sort of Debussy-like impressionist and very beautiful. And then he came here and became an astrologer and wrote some really groundbreaking books as an astrologer. He was Elvis Presley's astrologer, and apparently he was the one who told Elvis Presley to wear a cape with a high collar, and it has some sort of esoteric meaning, but the cape with the high collar was Dean Rudo's. And you can see it online, the chart that he made, the secret chart. So it was all done very secretively, but he made this beautiful, beautiful chart. I mean, it's beautiful to look at. I don't understand what's going on, but a chart for Elvis Presley. And he was a master astrologer, and then composed a lot in the sort of the 20s and 30s, and had this whole idea of the livingness of tones. I should read from, he has an amazing, amazing introduction to these pentagrams about music, how it gets inside your body, and it's very spiritual. So he was influenced by Scriabin, and the two of them influenced Ruth Crawford, and that whole tradition of you know, spirituality and music, I think is really interconnected through them.
I actually met him once.
You met Dane Rudar.
Yeah,
Tell us about it.
It was a brief encounter in Palo Alto.
Oh.
I forgot the clarinetist, Dale Polisar or something. Anyway, but and my recollection is he spoke about being at the premiere of The Rite of Spring.
Oh.
And that the riot was caused by the dance and the costumes more than the music.
Ah.
But
Wow.
kind of interesting to have met him.
Yeah.
And then we have Leo Ornstein as
Ornstein. Yeah.
Ornstein, Suicide in an Airplane, which will anticipate the Airplane Sonata of Antheil.
Right. Leo Ornstein. Yeah. Leo Ornstein read in a newspaper an account of a pilot in an airplane, in a propeller airplane. You can tell from the end of this piece, you can tell, well, from the beginning and the end, that it's a propeller airplane because of the do-do-do-do-do-do-do, you can tell it's a propeller airplane. So that he actually committed suicide in an airplane. And you can tell by the ending of this piece exactly how it was done, how he did it. And yeah, I was supposed to play this piece at the Phillips Collection right after September 11, 2001, and had to cancel had to not play this piece because of obvious reasons. But is there time for me to say just one thing about Leo Ornstein when he was 107?
Yes, didn't you describe that also to us once?
Please. I did, but very, very quickly that he was 107 when I went to visit him at his nursing home in Green Bay, Wisconsin. And he had only just come into the nursing home because before that he lived by himself. And he said longevity had partly to do with a big breakfast. So when I went to see him when he was 107 at his nursing home, he said that was in 2000. I went to see him and he had a typical breakfast, which was a glass of orange juice, 4 cups of coffee, oatmeal with half and half, a bowl of 15 strawberries, a sticky bun, dry cornflakes, and 3 pieces of toast. And that was his breakfast that day at age 107. And I brought him a dozen roses, which is not easy to get in November in Green Bay, Wisconsin. But anyway, I just was so in love with him and his music. And I asked him about some of these early pieces, and he used chord clusters maybe before Henry Cowell did. And I said, do you do this with your fists? And he said, yes, with my fists or the palm of my hand. So we got to talk about that. But Suicide in an Airplane is one of his very early radical pieces, unusual pieces. Yeah. And then what was the third? George Anton.
John Adams, China Gates.
John Adams, China Gates. So this piece he wrote for me when I was 17, and unexpected Christmas present one year. And it was so strange. I had no idea what to do with it because I had never really heard minimalism at that point. And I was just a classical pianist and I had no idea what to do with it. And now it's, back then it was just this weird piece, and now it's become kind of a classic. And like Vadim Kolodenko opened the Van Cliburn competition with this piece. So it got to be on that level. Yeah, but it's a wonderful piece.
But you premiered it.
I didn't premiere it because it was various things. I won't get it. I didn't premiere it. Another pianist premiered. Yeah.
And this is, we can see the audience on stage with this one. This was.
Oh, so this was at the, he gave the last year's commencement at the San Francisco Conservatory. He gave the commencement address to the students. And so they were looking for pianists to play they were looking for musicians to play some of his work. And because I teach occasionally at the San Francisco Conservatory, they asked me to play China Gates.
Right.
And he was there, and yeah.
Oh, wonderful. So, okay, so we'll hear these three works, Peter. Are you ready for this? Stars,
yeah.
Rudyard, Ornstein, and Adams. Each is about 4 or 5 minutes.
Yeah, we'll start with Dane Rudyard. Thanks for the incredible stories about all these works. It was a lot of fun to hear. I can't wait to hear the music that...
I want to hear more about you as a composer sometime soon.
Someday. First, I have to compose a few things, but I'm working on it. Dane Rudyard, here we are. And next, a classic, Leo Ornstein, Suicide in an Airplane. And we'll finish with a performance of China Gates, written by John Adams for Sarah. And this was from the commencement ceremony at San Francisco Conservatory of Music just last year. could fade that out.
You see?
I said, I wish I could have faded that out a little more elegantly.
Well, there's nothing like playing a piece in front, like, you know, a foot away from the composer and the entire conservatory faculty and all the students, all these young pianists who are, you know, of course, super critical and always, I don't know, those music schools are so tough. It's so tough. And a couple years ago, I went to the music school at the University of Michigan and left to become an English major because of that, you know, the little practice rooms that are so antiseptic and so antithetical to music making. And you sit there in your little box, and then there's a little window, and students come by and stare in the window, and you think, you just imagine they're saying to themselves, like, why are you playing it that way? Why are you playing that piece? You know, like just being really critical. And then you go down the hallways and it's all just fast and loud. It's all just, you know, how fast can you play the Rachmaninoff third piano concerto last movement? Like just fast and loud. And so I left when I was in college. I left to become an English major because I just couldn't stand it. And then last year, the year before, whenever it was, I went to the Detroit Institute of the Arts to play. I got a practice room at Ann Arbor and hadn't been back there in so many years. And someone gave me a practice room, and it all came back. And I was practicing in one of those little rooms, and then there was a little window, and the students going by and sort of scowling in, like, what are you doing there? You know, just all that sort of shame and baggage, and then I realized, you know, going down the hallways, like, and how can you make music? Like, how is it ever about the subtlety of a phrase? You know, like, really, I'm going to shape this phrase. I'm going to make it beautiful. Let's do, like, is this pianissimo or is this piano? How can you do that in that environment where all the practice rooms are just like, you know? And it really brought back a lot of memories. And I suddenly realized, like, that was okay to leave at that time. Anyway.
It sounded like a good thing to leave at that time. Sure.
So, but
a necessary choice.
But that's how, you know, great musicians are turned out in those conservatories. And I mean, it's somehow they get through. So, yeah.
I guess at that point, nothing will faze them. If they've been through the practice hall experience, then nothing in life will put them down again.
I guess so.
No, I remember it as well from my college too. But the practice room hall had its own culture as well. And it was also where the bulletin board was for all the announcements and upcoming concerts and everything too. And that's also where a lot of the private lessons were held as well. So it was just absolute chaos, because some rooms would be, I mean, all manner of instruments. And then at the end of the hall was one of the recording studios, which somehow had incredible acoustic buffering. And it had a big rehearsal space, and then it had the recording booth. And it was built in an old army barracks. This is in Santa Fe, at the former college of Santa Fe. And somehow it all worked, because in the benches outside, all the students would sit out smoking and talking with their professors, and they'd go inside and commit to another 4-hour monster session of practice. In a way, I'm missing it now. I'm feeling a bit nostalgic about it now that you've brought it up.
Yeah. Robert, how was your experience?
Yes. You mean
studying music in school?
Studying music? Well, you know, it was in composition, really, more than performance. My performances training came from private lessons throughout. But it was funny, you know, that lessons with Robert Helps at Princeton were down in the bowels of the music department, the basement, where the piano performance was consigned. And again, tiny practice rooms with a small window and all that. But spent a lot of time there, actually, working up pieces. And but it wasn't that it wasn't being surrounded by, you know, the cacophony of 20 pianists practicing in the hall or whatever. Let's see. It was interesting to pretty much be on one's own in terms of, in the graduate department as a performer. Performance at the graduate school was largely disdained. It was a time when the computer music was coming into its own with the printout of all the stacks of cards that were, Peter's familiar with the
Fortran computer, yeah.
And, you know, the notion, well, who needs performers? You know, you can walk out of the lab with a tape of a perfect performance and all of that. Well, it didn't work out that well. One of the reasons being that performances change over time, over generations. Interpretations have whole new approaches with the advent of new, younger performers and their abilities more advanced somehow. There's an evolution where you get to a point where performances are the relative impossibility of performances no longer become an issue, that performers can do most anything. And so the composer has to almost catch up with the abilities of performers. But it was also a place where a lot of composers just stopped writing. There was so much emphasis on analysis and mathematics, advanced mathematics, that composers either wrote one note per week or just stopped composing, and had more attrition of composers in a graduate program in composition than one could imagine.
So how were you different then?
Well, it was because of my performance that keeping up with the piano. So the performance, which was a function of my composition, but nevertheless kept up with it. We talked about this a bit with Peter in one of our early podcasts, but you know, it's just writing a piece that challenged my technique and then practicing it hard and until my technique was able to you know, gain mastery of the piece. So that set me aside from most of the others who were either engaged in electronic computer music or, again, struggling with the underpinnings of analysis for all of the composition that ultimately is, you know, is deadening really for creativity. It's another process, analysis. And we said there was a man, Ernst Oster, who had studied with Salzer, Felix Salzer, who had been a student of Heinrich Schenker. So there was that line. And we sat with him one time and he said, you know, if I thought composition was more interesting or performance more challenging or so, it would have been my pursuit. But I thought that analysis was the most exciting part of music. And that's why he pursued it. He was very good at it, what he did, but there was a strong emphasis on that aspect of music. And so for me, it was easy to go on my own track. And that was also the program itself that allowed for very independent work. We could all do, there was just one exam at the end, nothing in, you know, of course there was study of counterpoint and so all of that, and there's assignments, but an actual exam only took place at the very end. So we were pretty much on our own in that sense.
I love that idea that analysis is the most exciting of the disciplines.
Yeah, we'll see that.
Like, well, you must be in the right right place then, the right field at the right time.
Yes, and we would come in and object to the Schenker analysis in a way that really, ultimately, I now realize was a bit immature, but we would come in, some of the composers would say, well, what about all of this so-called numinous, that the material that was reduced to one chord progression or something, and that's where all the excitement is and all. And Oster would look and he says, "You analyze like a 12-year-old." But anyhow, we have. I really want to get to the Messiaen Oiseau Exotique video.
Yeah.
But meanwhile, can the one piece from our CD, maybe let's do one piece. Is that all right, Sarah?
Of course.
Because it's such a rare piece, recently discovered of Lou Harrison, the dance for Lisa Caron.
Yeah.
That had been unknown as a piece, and then did you bring it to light, or how did it come to light? And
it came to light that because I had played some Lou Harrison, and I got an email from a man who lives in San Francisco, out of the blue, who I didn't know. It was from a complete stranger, and he said, I was going through, my father-in-law just died. I think that was the story. My father-in-law just died, and I was going through his things, and I think it was in a piano bench. In a piano bench, there was this score. There were these pages, and it was a manuscript, and it said "Dance for Lisa Caron," Lou Harrison, an early piece from the 30s. So he said, I just found this, and I looked in the Lou Harrison books. I contacted, friends who have written books about him, and nobody knew about the existence of this piece. So in other words, it was the only copy was this manuscript of a piece that he had written and kind of forgotten about. And it was in this piano bench in San Francisco. And so he sent it to me. He said, he sent it to me, and on a PDF, and I started playing it. So that's what it is. So it's an early piece. He was in his 20s, I guess, and he was working a lot with dancers. So Lisa Caron was a dancer who he worked for. And
so we're very proud to have that and two other works of Lou Harrison that had heretofore not been recorded on our most recent CD, 20 Years of Ebb and Flow Arts. So why don't we take a listen to that piece? It's short. It's about a couple of minutes, right?
Yeah. What a treasure to have discovered that. Unbelievable. Yeah. Really exciting. All right. Let's give a listen.
Okay.
Some really interesting sort of pentatonic passages too. It's it does feel very Harrison despite the
and
years.
This is the score. So this is 1930. Gosh, what's the date? 1938. So he was in his 20s, and but I mean, it has these sections crossed out. And Robert, I remember when we recorded this at the house with was it a white piano? It was.
Yes.
And you were really, I have to say, you were amazing in the recording sessions, because there were pieces like The Changing Moment where I was completely misreading rhythms, and you were very, very sort of diplomatically saying, well, I think that's a 16th note rather than an 8th note. And, it's like, well, in the recording session is probably a good time to realize that, that you're sort of like shifting over to the correct way of playing it. But it was, this is a really, it's kind of amazing to find this unknown Lou Harrison piece, and very dance-like. And apparently as a young man, he was a dancer himself.
I can feel the dance in the work, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot to visualize there too.
And Sarah helped us celebrate the centennial of Lou Harrison here.
Yeah.
And really, in general, again, with the whole school of the West Coast, we've been so fortunate to have you help us, help me certainly, and help our audiences learn and listen to this remarkable music. And it's a world of discovery for anyone. The world of the music of Lou Harrison, a remarkable intellect and a composer, and just incredible human being, really.
Very much it's true, and very much a composer of the Pacific Rim, and which we are in, and that we're closer, you and I are closer to Asia than we are to Europe. And so that the East Coast, I mean, this is a gross generalization, but the East Coast where you were trained is more looking towards Europe for inspiration. And we in California and Hawaii are more attuned to Asia and in Lou Harrison's case, Indonesian gamelan, and for Terry Riley, more sort of North Indian classical music, and Chinese music, and so it's an interesting sort of geographical concept.
That's an interesting way to look at it. Looking so far west that we become far east.
Yes, exactly, exactly. Yeah.
Well, this is a podcast that's going to go on quite a long time, but
let's just keep talking for another couple hours.
Let's keep going. We might as well. We had in mind to include the Antal Airplane Sonata, and insofar as it connects to the suicide in an airplane. Now, how does the suicide happen? He just lets the engine run out? Is that? I think
so.
But
because there's no crash.
There's no crash.
There's no crash. I think what is most eerie about that piece is it just sort of like putters out in the air.
Eerie. That's a good word. I was trying to find the word for the feeling I had at the end, and it is eerie.
It is. Yeah. It is. Yeah.
Because the Messiaen Oiseau Exotique, which you did with members of the chamber ensemble of the San Francisco Conservatory, is that correct?
Yes, with Nico Clément conducting. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and that's really something. So, but we have the Airplane Sonata as well. Peter, do you have the what?
Do you want to skip the Airplane Sonata just for sake of time? Up to you.
Yeah. Well, why not? Let's skip it and let's get to to see you perform as well with the ensemble, which is so exciting. And the Antal is a composer we were so familiar with in New Jersey, being the bad boy of Trenton.
Oh, of course.
The bad boy of Trenton, yeah.
and really amazing character. and really great composer. But
Yeah.
it's on our CD Explorations, which all of which are available, either contacting us directly for a hard copy of the CD, or it's on the internet, and can be accessed that way. But it's well worth it. The thing about speaking of the recording sessions, you have an uncanny ability, Sarah, to create recordings that sound so beautiful, and where all the voices are heard, and yet somehow it's like magic, because it doesn't necessarily come through in the actual recording session. Because you're so experienced at doing this, you know how to make a recording really sound optimal. And sometime we'll have to, well, it's a secret, no doubt, but
But
we'll have to figure out.
Don't you feel like you're never really happy and you just want to do it all over again? And every time you hear it, you think, but that's marked pianissimo, or that's a subito piano. I should have done that. I mean, it's just an infinite. It's like is it Occam's razor, or it's one of those things where it's just you never quite, or like a parabola, like you sort of never get to the point of complete satisfaction with the recording session. But anyway.
Yeah, it's a whole different process involving some editing and so forth, and adjustments of the reverberations and the
right.
But still, there's something you do, and never been able to.
So nice.
But it's so great, that
nice.
it comes out in the recordings the way it does.
Well, I'm
very, very, pleased that you're part of these CDs, two of them.
You do amazing work with Ebb and Flow Arts. I'm very grateful to be on those recordings. But which brings us to Messiaen, actually, because in this piece he writes bird songs. So it's oiseaux exotiques, or exotic birds, and he really said that birds were the greatest musicians in the world, and he would say of himself that he was an ornithologist as well as composer, and studied bird song. And so he names the bird over each phrase of the bird song. You have the name of the bird, and you're supposed to imitate that bird. And the thing is that I think, but the other thing about Messiaen is his dynamic markings are really funny, because sometimes he'll have like F, 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 or I mean, maybe not that many Fs, but a lot of Fs. And I recently played Vision de la Main with the two piano piece with a pianist who is very loud. And I mean, he's an amazing, brilliant pianist, but he can get that sound, which actually I have to cover my ears. I was like, did Messiaen really mean to be so very loud with when he writes all those Fs? And or I mean, how do you modulate your sound for that? But with the bird song, I think you have to, instead of being F, 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 F with the bird sound, and it sounds very brittle if you really play it that loudly. Yeah. I think you have to really think of the bird, and again, go back and sort of listen to the birds and understand how it is and how the shape. I mean, it's not just like da 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 da, but it's da 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 or something. And that don't you think with Messiaen? Don't you think that's true?
Yeah, well, it's a miracle that he got this through piano, which you wouldn't associate necessarily with birdsong, but there's one piece that from his catalog of birds, just solo piano pieces, the owl that has that, Peter, you probably heard me perform this at the Makua Church, and there was a little feedback about it that, over the top. My performance had been over the top. Well, sorry, this was marked 4 Fs, and there is some kind of objective scale. It's not, calculable in terms of specific decibel mark. FFFF means this always in every piece.
It's relative, I guess.
It's relative, but if it's playable, that is, there's stories of works where you just can't do it. It may be these dynamics determined by the 12-tone row, and so you have a note, 5 Fs and then 5 pianos, and then going back and forth very quickly. It's not, serial kind of serialization of dynamics, which really proved to be impossible to render as such. But not in the case of Messiaen. He leaves plenty of room to perform whatever dynamic range. Don't you think, Sarah? There's nothing.
Why would an owl be FFFF?
Yeah. Well, I forgot.
There's an owl. Actually, there's an owl near my house that it is definitely FF.
Screeching. It can be screeching. Of course, he also, as he in these pieces, he wants to create an environment of the night first. The whole ambiance of where we're at with these birds. But maybe it was could have been. Some sort of night sound or environmental, explosion of in the environment there. But
maybe that's the context. Is that it's to play with such strength, as though the animal itself was calling for its maybe to embody the feeling of that expression.
Huh.
Yeah.
Robert, you have to make a video of the owl from Catalogue d'Oiseaux.
You mean of the performance of it?
Yeah,
or
of you performing it.
It was, it might, because there's a suggestion in the piece also of an owl and its prey, maybe. So there might have been some terrible moment.
Like a brutal strength.
Yeah. Little rodent or something.
And it's also, it's a piece that anticipates the rhythmic serialization. It actually did somehow adjust the rhythms, very, very complex also, and you've probably encountered it as well, let's say 4 voices, each at a different dynamic level, proceeding simultaneously, that kind of thing. Each shading dynamics differently.
So unfair.
And rhythmically, there's nothing regular about the rhythm in any sense. It's just that it's very much he was ahead of all of that sort of East Coast serialization, total serialization approach. Yeah. But remarkable music, and this is an exciting way to finish. And let's play. It's about 15 minutes, and we can perhaps finish up after that. Just to make some final observations, comments. So, why don't we hear the Oiseau Exotique by Olivier Messiaen.
Piano and small ensemble.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Piano and small, and this is a video recorded. Do you know where this was without looking at it, Sarah?
San Francisco Conservatory, and Nicole Paymont is the conductor. She's a really wonderful conductor. Did an album of Lou Harrison and has worked with a lot of contemporary composers. So.
Oh, very good. Okay, let's take a listen and look at that.
Okay.
was a lot faster than I remembered. I mean, the
Faster?
time flew. That was, I was like, wait, I thought this just started.
It's an incredible way to end a piece with those sort of hammer blows, like dun, dun, dun. It's amazing. And, you know, in listening to that, I also think how interesting that Messiaen uses bird songs in silence, and that it's almost like the context of being out in nature and the silence, and then you hear a bird, and then silence, and you hear another bird. But it seems audacious in that piece, like especially at the beginning, to have just to let silence be, and then a bird song, and then silence. Isn't it? I mean, I think, wow, that's amazing. I mean, he doesn't, no need to fill up all the space with stuff. I mean, he does that later on when there's such a clatter of bird song all at once, but it's kind of amazing how he uses silence in that piece.
Very effective.
Yeah, yeah. And she's a wonderful conductor.
Yes.
Oh, very expressive.
Speaking of women as conductors, that's another area where we don't often know of them. Wouldn't you say, Sarah? Is it similar to composers that we?
It's true, but you know, I think of our mutual friend Jerry Kuderna, who talks about studying with Antonio Brico, and what the conductor Antonio Brico, and what a transformative experience that was for him, and how she never talked about being a woman. That she said she wants to be thought of as a conductor and not a woman conductor, and so it's, I mean, that's a big topic too, which we could talk about for another 3 or 4 hours of not saying woman conductor, woman, that right. I know in this project that I'm doing, The Future is Female, that none of these composers want to be called woman composers, female composers.
Or as Pauline Olivero said, and don't call them lady composers.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's a wonderful article. Yeah. Anyway, we could talk about that forever.
Well, yes, we need another podcast. So we will plan again, because there's so much, Sarah, that you do, that you've done for, let's call it modern music throughout the world, but a lot of focus on American composers, and your radio broadcasts, your project, your current project, and your many concerts and writings and commissions, and so much that you do. So we salute you.
I salute you.
This is just a way, the way we can do it now.
Thank you. Next time we meet, it will be time for the premiere of your Enneagrams.
Thank you very much. Very honored that
based on the Enneagram, and if we had more time, we would talk about that too. Do you want to just mention what the Enneagram is about, or should we save that for another time?
We can save it. It's an honor to have been commissioned by you to write the piece. And we'll hope for a day when it can be done, even if it has to be done as you're doing now with studio recordings, video studio. That would be fine, of course. Yeah. But ideally, we would have public performances again.
Yeah,
that's another
not too distant future.
Yeah.
Not too socially distant future.
Yes, exactly. When we can hug each other after the concert.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, what an honor it was to have you, just scratching the surface of all the amazing work that you have done in your short life so far, and really excited to continue to support you in your endeavors and your projects. And we'll leave a link to your website. We'll leave a link to some information about your project, The Future is Female, so that people can really become acquainted with all the composers that you're working with in this endeavor, because I think that each one of them deserves to be highlighted in their own respect, of course,
Thank you so much. And I love your podcast, and I'm going through all of them one by one, and it's just really terrific that you're continuing Ebb and Flow Arts in this way while we're having this hopefully not too long period of time.
While we're enjoying this coffee without milk.
Coffee without milk. Yes. Yes. Thank you.
We look forward to doing this again soon, Sarah, and thanks so much. And I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day. Keep in touch, as always.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Robert.
Sarah.
Goodbye, everybody.